Like this guy coming out of prison, man, that's like such a worse position than I've ever been in,
Same
right? And
here.
I think about it's a good story because I think about myself as like a lot of times I do think, oh man, it's just so hard. What am I gonna do? Like, how am I gonna make this happen? But then I was like, okay, well, I don't have a felony record, and I think the most important thing about your story is there was no government agency there to hold his hand, right? The whole way. Like there's no speak of like welfare checks or like universal basic income or like free health care. There's none of that.
Most of you out there, I think, are maybe beholden to this lifestyle inflation that comes from like living in a big city and having to, work on the latest tech stack for the job. Like you have to go, get into machine learning and let's learn it now, or learn, software engineering and learn that now, and like do all this stuff. Like, and I'm going to kind of contrast that with somebody who kind of went to the University of. I don't even want to call it the University of Uncle Sam, but it's a different. Like, you'll see in a second here. I'll start explaining this. So I had an uncle when I was growing up, and he was in and out of jail. And then he did a long stretch. He did like a 17 or 18 year stretch of jail, prison, and I didn't see him for maybe 20 years. Literally, I think I saw him when I was 5, 6 years old, and then I didn't see him until I was 26. And it was, hey, your uncle's out of prison, like he's gonna come live, at our place. It was my stepdad at the time. He said, hey, your uncle's gonna come live with us, and I'm like, okay, so I'll come visit, and on Thanksgiving I'll meet. I haven't seen him in 20 years. So I saw him, and he if any of you guys have ever had this experience where you see somebody who's been rehabilitated, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you who haven't, when you see somebody who's come out of jail for 20 years and the rehabilitation process worked, they're a different person, and they make you feel bad about yourself because they are so disciplined, because they're told when to eat, they're told when to they don't even open doors, they wait for the door to open for them. They're told when to pee, they can't pee unless they're told exactly that. So they already have that kind of weird disciplined mindset where it's actually refreshing to see that in a weird way, to see like, hey, this person is like very, very disciplined, and they have a positive outlook on life because they just got out of prison. So typically speaking, like this is going to be hard to understand and hard to relate to, but just take my word for it. This guy came out a different person, and I saw him, and he was at the dinner table. We were discussing things, and somebody said something negative, and he said, that's a good point, and as I'm always thinking about it like this in a new positive mindset. So that's some context of the situation. This guy was in prison for the most of his adult life, so it's kind of like, how does he develop his skills to be a functioning member of society, right? That's what you're asking, right? So the answer is this: he came out and he immediately said, "Hey, I'm gonna get like a job helping this guy put on, installing roofs, because that's all he could find at the time. You come out of prison like you have a convicted felon, like you're a convicted felon, so it's hard to get certain jobs. You can't just go to Walmart and get a job. They're gonna run a background check and say, "Hey, you're a convicted felon. We're not gonna hire you." Although I think maybe that's changed, but my point is it's very difficult. So you got to find somebody that you got to usually find programs and say, hey, do you guys hire convicted felons? Elephant in the room. I'm a convicted. Yeah, we do, and here's why and everything. So okay, so he basically only found his roofing assistant job where he'd go help some guy install roofing stuff. But since he's been so disciplined through the system, and since that guy, like his boss or whatever at the time, whenever he told him to jump, he said how high, right? Like he just did exactly what he was told. But it's a real job. Like that's actually a real job where you're installing roofing. Um,
Yeah.
he was able to, in literally 6 months, kind of get to understand the system and say, okay, here's how you do it. Here's all the materials you need. Here's how you even like down to the say point of, hey, how do I study the process of how does my boss even sell to the idea that somebody needs to get their roofing like kind of dealt with, right? So he's absorbing all that information. 6 months later, he says, hey, I'm going to start my own roofing company. And this guy was been in prison for 20 years. Like, how do you, where's your learn? You didn't go to business school. You didn't get an MBA. Like, but wait, there's more. So he got his own company going. He still worked for the other gentleman, but in his free time, he would say, hey, let me build up some clients and kind of get my own thing going and figure out what I need. And then he eventually bought a truck. And of course, he's smart about it. He bought a used truck off of maybe Craigslist at the time. I don't remember, but he didn't go out and buy like the nicest bells and whistles F-350, whatever. He bought like a used truck that he just for what he needed. He got some parts, like he got everything he needed to kind of do his own thing. And yeah, the gentleman who he was working for was happy to see him go. He's like, hey, you're now have your own self-sustaining roofing business, and how now his net worth is more than mine. And this guy is somebody who started with literally nothing out of prison, and now he has his own roofing company who he employs people to help him to a point where he doesn't have to go on the roof anymore. So he's all set up and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think this is a perfect example of somebody who, in an unorthodox way, you might think, is kind of on the right path with the career in like a really good way. It's a purposeful career, and it pays a lot, and he's doing real stuff, right? But and notice how I said unorthodox in a thing in a way that you might think. No, 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 no. 20, 40, 40, 50 years ago when his like his parents did this, that was the normal way. That was the normal thing for somebody in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s is to do it yourself. And that's why so many people like America, quote unquote, is because that's the
Yeah.
American dream, right? Build it yourself. So that's the anecdote I was going to give. And I think comparing that with somebody that asks me, "Hey, I'm doing this programming boot camp, but I can't find a job because I've applied for a bunch of jobs on Indeed and all this stuff." It's a completely different thing than him just doing exactly what he did. It was just right in the door, get after it, and then go from there. So it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
talk to me about your initial feedback on just that whole anecdote.
That's a great anecdote. I mean, that's a perfect example of how I want everybody to be like that, right? Like I want myself to be like that. You know what I mean? Like I look up to people like that because that's exactly how this country was built. You know, like people, and again, people had no choice back then. When this country was founded, there was no option. You're coming here. Even think about the pilgrims coming here across the ocean, right? You ever look up and see like the infographics of like the number of pilgrims that like made it through the first winter? You ever seen that?
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah,
Yeah, it's like most of them are dead. You know, or like entire families just gone. You know, just they tried it. They got on the boat and they went across the ocean. They did their best, and it wasn't good enough, and they're dead. Right. That was the stakes that these people were playing for. Right. Our lives today are just not like that. The stakes are just not that high. Like if you got to think of it like that. If people were willing to do that, capable of taking such a huge risk, not just financially, but taking the lives in their hands and taking the lives of their families in their hands to go across the ocean and build something new in a new place that they've never been to before, that nobody's ever been to before. They don't even know what to expect. And they encountered incredible difficulties that you will never have to deal with. How hard is it for you to take your programming knowledge and try to build a product of your own and then market it? Like
right,
what is really the risk that you're in? What is so bad about that? That's so scary that you can't do it, right?
right.
Like this guy coming out of prison, man, that's like such a worse position than I've ever been in,
Same
right? And
here.
I think about it's a good story because I think about myself as like a lot of times I do think, oh man, it's just so hard. You know, what am I gonna do? Like, how am I gonna make this happen? You know, but then I was like, okay, well, I don't have a felony record. You know, like if I need to get a job like stat, I can. Like, it might not be a good one, but I can support myself very easily.
Yeah,
But here's a guy who is relying almost basically almost forced to rely on the generosity of others
right.
who are willing to hire a felon and more than that willing to train him and willing to even let him continue to work for him while he's like competing with him, right?
Hmm.
So this guy had to get so many breaks, but he took advantage of every single one of them, right? When the breaks come his way, he's ready to catch it and to run with it. And that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly what I want everybody to be like. And I think the most important thing about your story is there was no government agency there to hold his hand, right? The whole way. Like there was no there's no speak of like welfare checks or like universal basic income or like free health care. There's none of that.
No
It's
halfway
the government is
houses.
absent. The government is absent from that story, which is
Yeah,
exactly where they should be, right? Like out
yeah.
of the way.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's inspirational to me because I always think like, yeah, I don't have a convicted felon, like I don't have a felony record, and I'm not doing as well as he
Right.
is. So I always look up to him in that way, and I think like, okay, do I really need to go to prison for 20 years? Is that what I need to do to become successful?
Right. Is it
Like,
worth
sure,
it?
is that where you get your real? Is that where you get like?
Yeah.
Is that the school of hard knocks? Because like
Literally get locked in, you know?
literally, yeah, I was gonna say he's locked in, but I don't even want to use that word because like he's not locked in, he's
Yeah.
unlocked. So it's like
Yeah.
literally he was
Yeah.
locked in, and it's like obvious when the way he carries himself. And I know you've probably seen people like this, but the way he carries himself, he's so polite and he holds his tongue, and he's one of those guys who's almost military style, where you see it like
Yeah.
talk about politics, don't talk about and all that stuff, and he's getting after it in his own way, and he's not. Yeah, he's never even like we let him stay at, or I guess my stepdad let him stay at his house and stuff. So it's one of those like, yeah, hey, like he doesn't need the government to rely on that. Like he's got like a good faith connection, like a family and stuff. It's a perfect
Yeah.
story in my opinion because like I think there's a bunch of people out there that are just like that. We just don't hear about it.
Yeah.
Because I've got a lot of friends that like and anecdotal evidence of people that say, hey, I was addicted to alcohol for like 6 years. I was living in this big city. I was working at a bunch of restaurants and doing paying $3,000 a month for whatever a hotel, apartment complex, whatever. And I got out of there, and I moved to kind of the countryside and figured out a different way to kind of live about. Or I moved to Florida or Texas, whatever. And then then I started my whole like electrician apprenticeship, where I started like whatever a program, and now I spent 5 years now. I own my own house. I do my own thing. So it's like I got people that are like that in my life, where I'm thinking, okay, maybe the apprenticeship route is the route, because that's essentially what my uncle did. It's sort of like an apprenticeship, but it's his own
Yeah.
accelerated version of it. Because I mean, he's whatever, but it's just that's what I think is a solution to a lot of people right now, is like do something that actually could give you purpose, but don't search for purpose from that thing. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yep, I completely agree. Yeah, just make sure you're accurately contextualizing what you're doing in your life, and don't expect purpose where it's not really meant to be. I mean, we don't live in a world where most jobs are giving purpose. Maybe we did at one point, we don't now. So you got to find it somewhere else. So
right.
that's the key to me.
And I think that's a literal perfect segue to what is up, guys? Thank you for checking out this clip from the Maneuver Life Radio podcast. If this content is up your alley, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and definitely drop a comment letting us know whether or not you agree or disagree with what was discussed in the clip. We do have full unedited discussions that we upload on Mondays. The link for this one will be in the description. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good rest of your day.